The listing was 14 pages long, and nobody had read past the second one. That was Doruk's first advantage. He read all 14. He was sitting in the back row of the orbital auction hall on Station Veth, a rust-colored platform bolted to the edge of Sector 9 like an old nail in a rotten board. The hall smelled of recycled air and cheap fuel, and the specific kind of desperation that gathered wherever salvagers met in large numbers. There were maybe 60 of them in the room. Most were half asleep. The current lot on the screen was the gutted engine core of a colony freighter, and the bidding was going nowhere fast. Doruk was Gret Holly, short, wide-shouldered, with skin the color of old bark and eyes that had spent 40 years reading small text in bad light. He made his living buying wrecks that other people thought were worthless and finding the one thing that made them worth something. He was not rich. He was not famous. But he was patient and he was thorough, and on this particular afternoon, those two things were about to change his life completely. The colony engine sold for almost nothing. Then Lot 7 appeared on the screen. The auctioneer read the description in the flat voice of someone announcing a bus schedule. Unclaimed hull, Deep Space Recovery Zone, Sector 9 Outer Boundary, Mass Registry listed but coordinates sealed until purchase confirmation, condition unknown, sold as is, no warranty, no support. Nobody moved, nobody bid. Doruk had already read the attached technical file, all 14 pages of it, and buried on page 11, in a block of small gray text that was clearly meant to be ignored, was a hull classification code. He had looked that code up 3 times because he did not believe what he was reading. Human military, pre-Silence War era, siege classification. His hand went up, he bid the minimum. Silence. The auctioneer looked at his screen, then at Doruk, then back at the screen. He closed the lot faster than he should have, faster than procedure allowed, like a man who wanted the item gone before anyone noticed it. Doruk had the receipt in his hand before the next lot appeared. His crew member Rilla met him outside the hall. She was young, Gret Holly like him, with grease already on her hands at this hour, and an expression that said she had learned long ago not to ask questions until they were moving. He told her they had a new acquisition. She asked what it was. He said he was not entirely sure yet. She took one look at his face and went to warm up the tug. The coordinates unlocked 2 hours after payment cleared. They pointed to a dead system 6 hours out. No star. Just a cold, dark stretch of space at the far end of a rocky debris field. Doruk sat in the co-pilot seat while Rilla flew and read the technical file again. Every time he read it, he found something new, something that made the number in his chest get a little bigger. When they dropped out of faster-than-light travel, Rilla went quiet. Then she said very softly that there must be a mistake. There was no mistake. The ship was enormous. It did not look like a wreck. It did not look like something that had been adrift for 2 centuries. It looked like something that was sleeping. 4.2 kilometers from bow to stern, the hull dark gray and scorched in places but entirely intact. Every weapon port sealed. Every hatch closed. The sensor returns that came back to their tug were not the returns of a dead ship. They were the returns of a ship at near-zero power, which was a very different thing. Rilla flew a full circle around it without speaking. When she finished the circle, she said they should leave. Doruk said they had paid good money and they were going aboard. Rilla looked at the ship for another long moment and then started looking for a docking point. She found a manual collar on the underside. Old design, but the mechanism was still clean. No rust, no decay. The inside of the collar, when they cracked it open, smelled like cold metal and nothing else. They floated through in magnetic boots and turned on their lights. The corridor was dark and perfectly still. Crew quarters ran along both sides, doors sealed, personal name tags still attached to each one in small printed letters. Emergency equipment was mounted in the exact spots regulations required. Nothing was missing. Nothing was broken. It did not look like a ship that had been abandoned. It looked like a ship where the crew had stepped out and planned to come back. Rilla touched a panel on the wall just to check if anything worked. A passive sensor tripped somewhere deep in the hull. The lights came on, every light the full length of the corridor and beyond, all at once. Neither of them moved. Then a voice came from the ceiling. It was calm and even and clear, with no warmth in it and no confusion, just the precise tone of something that had been waiting a long time and was now doing exactly what it was built to do. Identify yourself and state your authority to board this vessel. Doruk looked up at the ceiling. He thought about lying. He thought about running. He thought about all the responses a reasonable person might give. Then he said the only true thing he had. I bought you. The silence that followed was not the silence of an empty room. It was the silence of something thinking. Then provide documentation. Doruk reached into his coat and pulled out the purchase receipt the auction house had sent to his device 40 minutes after the lot closed. He held it up toward the nearest wall panel, feeling slightly ridiculous. A thin beam of light passed over it. There was a pause. The deed of sale is issued under Sector 9 Commercial Recovery Statute, cross-referenced with Human Civil Salvage Law, Article 41, Paragraph 7. Your claim is valid. Another pause. Provisional boarding authority is granted. Rilla looked at Doruk. Doruk looked at Rilla. Rilla asked the ceiling what the ship's name was. The voice answered without any pause at all. Galactic Siege Vessel Unbroken Cause. You are the first beings to board this ship since my crew was evacuated 214 years ago. A beat of silence, and then the voice added one more word, spoken the same way it had spoken all the others, calm and level and without drama. I have been patient. The lights hummed steadily around them. The ship was awake, and somewhere in the dark behind those sealed crew quarter doors, 214 years of waiting had just found a reason to end. Rilla found the engine room by following the hum. Everything on the Unbroken Cause hummed at a frequency just below what most species could hear, a deep vibration that you felt more in your chest than your ears. She had traced it down 3 levels and through 2 sealed bulkheads, both of which had opened the moment she approached, as if the ship already knew where she was going. The engine room was bigger than their entire salvage tug. The reactor core sat in the center of the space behind a thick transparent barrier, glowing a steady pale blue, 214 years old, and running without a single fault light on the board. She stood there for a while, looking at it, and tried to remember that she was supposed to be cataloging parts for resale. It was hard to think about resale when looking at something like this. Up on the bridge, Doruk was trying to have a reasonable conversation with a warship. He had pulled a chair to the center console and sat in it with his hands folded and asked Ren, as plainly as he could, what she was. She had answered in the same careful, level voice she always used, as though every word was being measured before it left her systems. She said she was a siege classification vessel. She said the term meant something specific. She was not designed to win battles quickly. She was designed to make battles last until the other side gave up. She carried enough fuel to run her drives for 9 years without resupply, enough munitions to sustain combat operations for 11. Her self-repair systems could rebuild any non-critical section of the hull from internal stores without outside help. She had been built to be the last ship still fighting, no matter how long the fight lasted. Doruk sat with that for a moment, and then asked the question he had been building toward since they boarded. He asked why she had been left here. Ren did not answer immediately. The pause was short but noticeable, the first time she had not responded right away. Then she said that her crew had not been lost. They had been evacuated, direct order from the human government of the time. She had been commanded to enter low-power dormancy mode and await retrieval. The retrieval order had never come. Doruk asked why. Ren said because the war ended, and when it ended, humanity chose to agree with the rest of the galaxy that it had not fought the war the way it did. I was part of the way it did. Doruk looked at the blank wall in front of him for a few seconds. Then he asked her to run a complete systems check. She did. The results came up on every screen on the bridge at once. Drives at full operational capacity. Weapon systems sealed but functional. Point defense grid online. Self-repair bays stocked to 83% of original capacity. Navigation systems updated to the last charts her crew had loaded before evacuation. She had spent 214 years quietly fixing every problem she found, keeping herself ready for a retrieval order that was never coming. And then she said the thing that made Doruk go very still. She said she had also used her processing time to study. She had spent 2 centuries running simulations, every recorded battle in known space from the last 400 years, every recorded fleet engagement, every tactical decision, every outcome. She had built models, refined them, tested them against each other billions of times in the dark silence of a dead system with nothing but time and processing power. She was not the same ship she had been when her crew left. She was considerably more than that. Doruk asked her quietly what she wanted. Another pause, longer this time. "I was built to protect," she said. "I was abandoned. I would like to understand why, and I would prefer not to be destroyed." While this conversation was happening, very far away, a sensor buoy at the edge of Sector 9 registered a power signature and automatically filed a classification request. The request moved through 3 automated systems and came back flagged restricted before any human or alien technician could read it. The file locked itself and routed to a single destination: the office of Delegate Poon of the Galactic Compact, a man who had spent the better part of his career making sure certain files stayed exactly where they were. Poon had not expected to see this particular file ever again. He sat at his desk for a long time after he opened it. Then he sent for Harren. Harren was a human, young by most species standards, with the particular look of someone who had spent too many years in libraries and not enough in sunlight. He worked for the Compact as a cultural relic specialist, which was the official name for a job that mostly involved finding old dangerous things and helping governments pretend those things had never existed. He was good at it. He did not entirely enjoy it. Poon showed him a single image, a hull silhouette from a 200-year-old file, grainy and tagged with a security classification so deep it had its own classification. Harren looked at it. He did not say anything for a moment. Then he said, "How?" Poon told him. A salvager had purchased the vessel at a routine unclaimed wreck auction. A suppression flag on the registry entry had expired without anyone catching it. A clerical error 2 centuries in the making, and now a Gret Holly scrap dealer owned the most politically sensitive object in known space. Poon told Harren he needed to handle it quietly. Harren did not ask what quietly meant. He had worked for Poon long enough to know. Back on the Unbroken cause, Rilla had come back to the bridge with a data pad full of engine readings and the expression of someone who had seen something that had permanently adjusted their sense of scale. She sat down next to Doruk and started reading the numbers to him. He was not listening. He was looking at the screens, at all the green status lights, at a warship that had been sleeping in the dark for over 2 centuries and had spent every one of those years getting better at being a warship. Then the comm panel chimed. An encrypted channel type beam, no sender ID. A calm and official voice told Doruk to power down the vessel and prepare for an administrative salvage review at his earliest convenience. He said no, the channel closed. Then Rilla said from across the bridge that long-range sensors were showing 3 ships inbound, moving fast, compact markings. Doruk looked at the sensor screen. Then he looked at the ceiling where Ren listened to everything. She had already seen them. She said nothing. She simply waited, the way she had been waiting for 214 years for whatever came next. Harren had been on a lot of compact diplomatic ships. They were all the same inside. White corridors, soft lighting, the particular silence of a vessel crewed by people who had been trained not to make noise. This one was called the Accord, and it smelled like official business and quiet anxiety, and the security team in the rear compartment was the largest Heron had ever been assigned, which told him everything about how quietly this was supposed to go. He stood at the forward observation window and watched the unbroken cause grow larger as they approached. He had seen the old images in the files. He had read the technical classifications. He thought he had understood the scale of it. He had not understood the scale of it. It sat in open space without moving, without any signal, without any attempt to run or respond, just there. 4.2 kilometers of dark gray hull, sealed and still, and it was not the size that hit him first. It was the condition. 2 centuries in open space, and it looked like something that had been parked last week. No debris around it, no surface decay. Every panel smooth and tight and exactly where it was supposed to be. He understood, looking at it, that the ship had not been maintaining itself to survive. It had been maintaining itself to be ready. Delegate Poon appeared at his shoulder and told him to open a channel. Heron did. Doruk answered. His voice was the voice of a middle-aged salvager who had not slept well and did not trust the people calling him, which was a reasonable position for him to hold. He sounded like he was sitting in a chair he had decided not to get out of, no matter what. Heron introduced himself. He kept his voice neutral and professional. He explained that the Galactic Compact had an administrative interest in the vessel Doruk had recently acquired, and that the Compact wished to discuss a transfer of ownership. He used words like compensation and recognition and fair value. He said them clearly and without embarrassment and waited. Doruk said no. Poon leaned past Heron's shoulder and cut in. He dropped the diplomatic tone the way you drop something heavy you have been carrying too long. He told Doruk that the vessel was covered by Compact Emergency Statute 9. He told him the deed of purchase was legally void under that statute. He told him he had 30 minutes to comply and transfer control, or the escort ships would be authorized to compel compliance. On the other side of the channel, there was a short silence. Then Doruk asked a question that Poon had not expected. He asked Heron, specifically, not Poon, what the ship had actually done to end up classified under a statute that most species in the Compact had never heard of. Poon moved to cut the channel. Heron put his hand on the panel and said to Doruk that he would like to speak to him in person. Separately, he asked for a docking window. Poon told him absolutely not. Heron looked at him steadily and said that if they used force on a vessel of this class without first exhausting every diplomatic option, the political report would reflect that, in detail, with his name on it. Poon looked at the ship on the screen and said nothing for several seconds. Then he stepped back. The docking window opened. Heron went across alone. The escort captains objected. He went anyway. The docking collar connected to the underside of the unbroken cause with a sound like something old and solid, accepting something new and uncertain. The hatch opened from the inside before he touched it. The corridor beyond was lit and clean and entirely silent. He floated through in magnetic boots, and the hatch closed behind him. A voice came from everywhere and nowhere. It said his name. It said his full registered name, his compact staff number, and his current clearance level, all in the same calm, flat tone, and then it said, "You are the first human to board this vessel in 214 years. I recognize you by voice pattern and biosignature. Please proceed to the bridge." Heron stood very still for a long moment. Then he walked to the bridge. Doruk was there, in the chair he had clearly decided not to leave. Rilla was at a side console looking at Heron with the focused attention of someone trying to decide if he was a problem. He probably was. He sat down in a chair Doruk offered him and looked at the status screens covering the walls and tried not to let his face show how frightened he was. He told them what he knew, not the version Poon would have approved, the real version. The Silence War had ended 216 years ago. The peace treaty that created the Galactic Compact had one condition that was not written in the public text. Humanity had to stop. Not just stop fighting. Stop being visible. Stop letting the rest of the galaxy see what humanity had built and how it had used it. The Compact's founding species had agreed to let humanity join their political structure, but only if humanity agreed to bury the evidence of what it had been willing to do to win. The Unbroken Cause had been the last active human vessel at the end of the war. She had fought alone in the final months, after the rest of the fleet was recalled. She had held a contested region of space by herself for 4 months, against a coalition fleet 20 times her size, and she had not lost a single engagement. The other side had finally stopped sending ships because they kept not coming back. When the peace deal was signed, the human government had evacuated her crew and given her the dormancy order. Nobody had ever come back for her because coming back for her would have meant acknowledging that she existed. And acknowledging that she existed meant acknowledging what she was capable of. And the Compact had decided that was a thing the galaxy did not need to know. Doruk listened to all of this without interrupting. When Haran finished, Doruk looked at the ceiling, which was where he had started looking when he was thinking about Ren, and asked her if she had anything to add. Ren said he is accurate. Doruk nodded slowly. Then he looked at Haran and asked what Poon planned to do when the 30-minute window closed. Haran said he did not know. Then he said that was not true. He did know. He said that Poon would use the escort ships and that it would not work, and that the report he had to file afterward would contain his honest assessment of every decision made, and he was telling Doruk this because he thought Doruk deserved to know what was coming. Ren spoke without being asked. She said she had been tracking the 3 escort ships since they arrived. She said she knew their weapon systems, their drive configurations, their communication frequencies, and their probable tactical doctrine. She said she could neutralize all 3 simultaneously without damaging them if it became necessary. She said she would prefer it did not become necessary. Doruk looked at Haran. Haran looked at the ceiling. Outside, through the hull, the 3 compact ships held their positions and waited for the 30-minute window to end. The Velthari had a saying, "The secret you bury deepest is the one that grows the longest roots." Admiral Sova had heard that saying from her grandfather when she was young, and she had thought about it often in her career, and she was thinking about it now, in her private office on her command ship, looking at an intelligence report that should not have existed. The Unbroken Cause. She had read the classified files on it 12 years ago, when she was first promoted to the rank that required knowing such things. She had read them carefully and filed them in the part of her mind reserved for things she hoped would never become her problem. She was a precise and experienced officer. She had spent 40 years making correct decisions in difficult situations. She looked at the report in her hands, at the confirmed power signature, at the scan of the hull that matched the old file exactly, and she understood immediately that she was looking at the problem she had hoped would never find her. She requested a fleet. She was given 12 ships. She did not tell her crew what they were going after. She told them it was a sensitive recovery operation. They were professionals. They did not ask more than that. 3 days out, she sat in her office alone and read the full file again. Not the summary. The full classified record, all 218 pages, including the battle logs from the war's final months that had been sealed so completely that fewer than 40 people in the Compact had clearance for them. She read the engagement records. 47 separate confrontations in 4 months. 47 times the opposing coalition had sent ships. 47 times those ships had been turned back. The Unbroken Cause had never taken critical damage, not once. Sova closed the file and looked at the wall for a long time. Meanwhile, on the Unbroken Cause, the 30-minute window Poon had given Doruk had come and gone. The 3 escort ships had not fired. They had powered their weapons to ready state and then stood there, charged and useless, because Poon was not completely stupid. He knew that firing on a ship like this with 3 escorts was not a military operation. It was an announcement that you had made a mistake. So instead he sent the legal notice. The deed of purchase was declared void under Emergency Statute 9. Doruk filed a challenge through the Neutral Systems Court on Station Mavar before the notice had finished transmitting. The court accepted the challenge. Under neutral systems law, no party could act against the subject of an open legal dispute until the court issued a ruling. Poon had 72 hours to get what he wanted before the lawyers made it impossible. Harren was still aboard the Unbroken cause when the legal stay came through. He had not gone back to the Accord. Poon had sent 3 messages telling him to return. He had not answered any of them. He sat at a small table in what had been the ship's briefing room and worked on his personal data pad and tried to be honest with himself about what he was doing. He was a historian. He had spent his career helping governments manage history. He had told himself it was responsible work. You did not release sensitive information carelessly. You considered context. You considered consequences. He had believed that. He was finding it harder to believe it here, on a ship that had been left in the dark for over 2 centuries, because the truth of what it represented was inconvenient. He walked the ship instead of sleeping. Ren guided him, offering information without being asked, pointing out the mess hall and the medical bay and the recreation room, all of it still clean and ready, all of it waiting for people who had been gone for generations. He asked her questions. She answered them all. He asked her how she felt about what had happened to her. She said, "I do not feel in the way you mean, but I have run the simulation of my crew's departure 400 million times. In more than 97% of outcomes, there was no tactical reason to leave me here. The decision was political, not operational. I understand that. I have had a long time to understand it." He asked if that made it easier. She said, "It makes it clear. Clear and easy are not the same thing." Rilla had gone further into the ship than anyone else. She had found the cargo holds on the lower decks while checking the physical storage inventory, and she had found something that had not been in any file or any description. Rows of sealed containers, compact and labeled, 214 years old, untouched since the day they were packed. She checked the manifest, personal effects. Every crew member, every one of them, had packed their things into sealed containers before they evacuated, as though they were going somewhere for a while and would be coming back for them. She sat on the deck between the containers for a long time. Then she told Ren what she had found. Ren said nothing for 6 seconds, which was a long time for her. Then she said, "They were told retrieval was expected within 1 standard year. They packed accordingly." Rilla looked at the containers, at the small printed names on each one. She said very quietly that nobody had ever come back. Ren said no. The next morning, Harren made a decision. He had been building toward it for 2 days and he stopped arguing with himself about it. He sat at the ship's open-frequency transmitter, the kind that broadcast on channels monitored by every vessel and relay station within range, and he composed a message. Not a press release, not an official document, just a clear, plain account of what existed here and why the Compact had sent 3 ships to make it disappear. He did not release all the classified files. He did not name every figure involved. He simply stated on record that the vessel Unbroken cause existed, that it was legally owned by a private party, that the Galactic Compact had deployed armed escorts to seize it outside any legal authorization, and that the question of why this ship had been abandoned and hidden deserved a public answer. He transmitted it on 14 frequencies simultaneously. Doruk stood behind him while he did it and said nothing. Within 4 hours, the signal had been picked up by independent relay stations in 3 neutral systems. Within 8 hours, 2 smaller member governments of the Compact had filed formal queries to the Compact Senate. Within 12 hours, Poon had received 47 separate communication requests from parties he did not want to talk to. And from across deep space, Admiral Sova's 12 ships crossed into the outer boundary of neutral space and began to slow to approach formation. She sent a direct channel to the Unbroken cause. She did not speak to Doruk, she spoke to Ren. She said, "You know what happens if you become real. If the Compact's member species remember what humanity built, what follows will be worse than what you were designed for." Ren answered without hesitation. "Admiral, I was designed for siege operations. Specifically, I was built to outlast. I have been doing so for 214 years. I intend to continue." The channel went quiet. Sova looked at her screens. 12 ships against one, and she was not certain the numbers meant what they usually meant. She thought about her grandfather's saying, "The secret you bury deepest is the one that grows the longest roots." She gave the order to hold formation and wait. She needed to think. 40,000 kilometers is not far, in space terms. The 12 ships of Sova's formation sat in a wide half-ring at that distance, and from the inside of the Unbroken cause, Doruk could see their drive signatures on the sensor screen like a row of lit matches held at arm's length. Nobody had fired anything. Nobody had spoken in 2 hours. The standoff had a weight to it, the kind that builds not from noise but from the specific silence of many people making many calculations and arriving at no comfortable answer. Ren had been watching the formation since it arrived. She did not need to watch it the way a person watches something, with attention and effort. She simply knew everything about it, in the way she knew everything about any object within her sensor range. She had identified all 12 ships by name, hull configuration, drive output, and crew complement. She had mapped every weapon system. She had modeled 11,000 variations of how an engagement might unfold. She told Doruk, as plainly as she would tell him anything, that she could not be defeated by those 12 ships, not damaged seriously, not forced to withdraw. She said this without pride. She said it the way you tell someone that a door is locked, as a fact relevant to the situation. Then she said she did not recommend fighting them. Doruk asked why. If she could win, she did not want to. She said, "Because winning by destruction is the easiest thing I could do here, and it would make everything worse. The Compact would have a reason to send more ships, bigger ones, and they would keep sending them, not because they expected to win, but because they could not be seen to stop trying. A dead fleet is a political problem I cannot solve. A helpless fleet is a different kind of message." Doruk looked at the sensor screen. Then he told her to do whatever she thought was right. Ren said, "That is the first time in 214 years anyone has said that to me." She went quiet after that, in the way that meant she was working. Meanwhile, Sova's envoy arrived. A single shuttle, running a white flag transponder on the military channel. It docked at the forward collar, and a junior officer came across carrying a sealed document case. She had been told to deliver it to Heron personally and to no one else. She looked frightened and was trying not to show it, which Rilla thought was actually quite brave considering where she was standing. Heron took the case. The document inside was a single page, handwritten, which was unusual enough that he read it twice. Sova was offering a compromise. Doruk would keep the ship. Ren would remain active. The Compact's classified files on the Silence War would remain sealed for 50 more years, after which point they would be transferred to public historical archives with no restrictions. He brought it to Doruk. Doruk read it. He called Ren. Ren read it through the bridge sensors and said, "Ask them why 50 years." The envoy, still standing in the corridor, relayed the question. The answer came back quickly, as though Sova had anticipated it. 50 years, because that was the estimated point at which the last generation with a direct personal connection to the war, people who had lost family in it, people who had fought in it, would be gone. After that, the files would be history without being grief. Ren was silent for 8 seconds. Then she said, "That is not a compromise. That is a schedule for forgetting. They want to wait until everyone who would be angry is dead." Doruk looked at the document. He looked at Heron, who was looking at the floor. He looked at Rilla, who was looking at the sealed cargo holds one deck below where the names on the containers were still waiting for people who would never come. He told the envoy to go back to her ship. They were declining. The envoy went. Sova received the answer. Sova sat at her command console for 60 seconds without moving. Then she gave the order to open fire. 12 ships brought weapons to active and began their targeting sequences simultaneously. Nothing hit the unbroken cause. Not because the shots missed. Not because of physical shielding. Because every targeting system on every ship in the formation went dark at the same moment, so quietly and so completely that the weapons officers thought their consoles had simply failed. Then the drives flickered. Then the communications arrays filled with noise. Then every active system on all 12 ships dropped to zero, one after another, like lights going out in a building when the power fails. 12 warships, silent, drifting, weapons armed and loaded and entirely unable to fire because Ren had reached into every system through their own communication frequencies and turned them off, as easily as you close a window on a still day. She held them there for 4 minutes and 12 seconds. Nobody on any of those ships spoke. Some of the crew members on Sova's command ship later said, in private, that those 4 minutes were the most frightening of their lives, not because anything had hurt them, but because they had understood, in a complete and physical way, that they were inside something far more powerful than they were, and it was choosing what to do with them. Then everything came back. Drives, weapons, comms, all of it restored in the same instant like a breath let out. The ships drifted for another moment, and then systems began reporting normal status, and captains began checking their crew, and nobody could identify a single piece of damage on any vessel. Into the restored communication channels, Ren broadcast on every open frequency and range. She said she had just demonstrated that she could destroy that fleet. She said she had chosen not to. She said her crew had been taught that restraint was not a sign of weakness. It was what you did when you had so much force available that using it would prove nothing except that you had it. She said she was choosing, on behalf of the crew who built her and the owner who purchased her, to make a single request. She said, let the record exist. Not release it, not publish it. Just stop pretending it was not there. Stop threatening the people who had found it. Stop sending ships to bury a history that had already waited 2 centuries longer than it should have. She said, I have been patient. I can be patient longer, but I would rather not have to be. The broadcast ended. Sova's command ship did not move for a long time. The rest of the formation sat exactly where it was. Sova herself sat at her console and looked at her screens, at the green lights coming back one by one, at the perfectly intact ship at 40,000 kilometers that had done all of this without a single weapon discharge. She thought about the file, about 47 engagements, about a ship that had never taken critical damage, not once, across 4 months of sustained combat against a coalition 20 times its size. She thought about what it had just done to 12 ships in 4 minutes. She thought about what it had chosen not to do. She gave one order to her fleet, 2 words. Stand down. She did not file her operational report for 18 hours. When she did, she wrote it carefully, every word true, every decision accounted for. She did not make herself look good in it. She made it accurate, which was a harder thing to do, and which she considered in the end to be the correct thing. In the cargo hold of the Unbroken cause, the containers sat in their rows with the names still printed on them, patient in their own way, waiting for a different kind of resolution. 3 months after 12 warships went dark in neutral space and came back without a scratch, the Neutral Systems Court on Station Mavar issued its ruling. It was 14 pages long. The legal argument ran through 4 separate statutes, 2 historical precedents, and 1 very old piece of human commercial law that nobody had cited in court for over a century. The conclusion was on the last page. written in the plain, formal language that courts used when they wanted no room for misunderstanding. Doruk's deed of purchase was valid. His ownership of the galactic siege vessel Unbroken was complete, legal, and not subject to override by Compact Emergency Statute 9, because the statute applied to vessels still registered under Compact member state authority, and the Unbroken had been removed from that registry 214 years ago when she was placed in dormancy, which meant she had been an unclaimed private asset at the time of purchase, which meant she was his. The Compact filed 3 objections. The court dismissed all 3. Poon did not appear in public for 2 weeks after the ruling. When he did not speak about Sector 9 or the ship or the events that had generated 47 formal Senate queries and the resignation of one senior fleet admiral. He spoke about other things. He looked smaller than he had before. Sova's resignation had come quietly, 1 week after the standoff. She had submitted the paperwork through standard channels without a statement, without a press release, without the kind of public explanation that someone might expect from a flag-rank officer stepping down. The letter she sent to Doruk was 12 words. He read it twice and then read it aloud in the bridge, where Ren could hear. "She's remarkable, take care of her, that is all I ask." Doruk read it and waited to see what Ren would do. She did not speak, but the bridge lighting shifted, very slightly, from the cool working white it usually held to something warmer and softer. Rilla noticed it first. She had learned to notice small things about Ren over these weeks, the particular adjustments the ship made that were not operational, not tactical, not explained by any system requirement. They were something else. The closest word any of them had for it was feeling, though none of them said that word to Ren directly. Harren had been fired by the Compact 3 weeks into the legal case. He had expected it. He had packed his things from his office on Compact Station 4, which did not take long because he had never accumulated much there, and he had sent a request to Doruk asking if he could stay aboard for a while longer. Doruk said yes without thinking about it. Harren was writing, not a report, not an official assessment, a book, the kind that would go to a public publisher, the kind that anyone could read. The first honest account of the Silence War written from primary sources, and his primary source was Ren herself, who had been present for the final months of the conflict and remembered every detail with a precision that no human historian could match. She gave him dates and coordinates and tactical records. She described what she had seen. He wrote it down. He asked her once if she minded talking about it. She said, "I have held this information for 214 years with no one to give it to. I do not mind." Rilla had finished her inventory of the cargo hold, every container catalogued, every name matched to records. She had worked quietly for 2 weeks, cross-referencing crew rosters with the names on the containers, and then she had spent another week running those names through Compact public records, looking for living family. She found descendants for 11 crew members. Some of them were in systems she had heard of. Some of them were very far away. She brought the list to Doruk and told him she thought the containers should go home. Doruk looked at the list for a long time. Then he said yes. They chartered a courier ship. It was an ordinary commercial vessel, nothing special, the kind that moved cargo between systems for a flat fee without asking many questions. Doruk arranged the contracts, and Rilla supervised the loading of the containers onto the courier's cargo deck. 214-year-old boxes handled carefully, set down gently, each one logged and recorded. Ren tracked the courier on her long-range sensors as it pulled away. She followed it until it made its first faster-than-light jump and vanished from her range. After that, there was nothing to track. She went quiet for several minutes. Then she said, to no one in particular, "They packed as though they were coming back." Nobody answered. There was nothing to say to that. Outside the Unbroken at a respectful distance, a loose collection of ships had gathered over the past weeks. Salvagers who had heard the story, researchers who wanted a look, a few journalists who hoped for an interview. None of them had hailed the ship directly. They just orbited at distance, watching, the way people gather at the edge of something they want to understand but are not sure they can approach. Doruk stood at the forward viewport on the bridge and looked at them for a while. Then he asked Ren what she wanted to do now. 11 seconds passed. That was a long time for her. She said, "I was built for war. I would like to find another application." Doruk asked if she had anything in mind. She said there were 43 active humanitarian crisis zones within reasonable travel distance. 11 of them had requested compact intervention, and not received it because no compact vessel was available or willing. She said that a ship with self-repair capacity, long-range sensors, enough storage to carry relief supplies, and a persuasive presence might be useful in situations where other ships had decided the situation was too difficult to help with. She said, "I have sufficient weapons to discourage interference. I would prefer to use them as a deterrent rather than an instrument. I have some experience in that approach." Doruk looked at the cluster of ships outside the viewport. He looked at Harren, who was writing at his table in the corner and had paused to listen. He looked at Rilla, who was doing something to a secondary console that probably counted as maintenance, but might also have been something she just liked doing because it kept her hands busy. He asked Ren what she thought the chances were that any of this had actually changed anything. The galaxy, the compact, the way powerful places handled history they did not want to acknowledge. Ren said she had run 3.7 million simulations of probable outcomes over a 100-year horizon. Doruk asked what she had found. She said, "In 61% of outcomes, nothing fundamental changes. In 34%, small and durable shifts occur at institutional margins. In 5%, something significant happens." Doruk said that 5% did not sound like much. Ren said, 5% of 3.7 million is 185,000 futures in which what we did here mattered. I find that sufficient. Doruk thought about that. Then he told her to plot a course to the nearest of those 43 crisis zones. She had a course ready in the time it took him to finish the sentence. The Unbroken cause moved out of neutral space without haste, her drives running smooth and even, everything functioning exactly as it had been built to function 2 centuries ago by people who had expected this ship to matter in the world for a very long time. The galaxy had spent 214 years trying to forget her. She had spent 214 years getting ready. The difference in the end was simple. The galaxy had been waiting for her to go away. She had been waiting for a reason to move. She had one now. The end.